All right, bud. I'm sure you have gotten a lot of questions about Bill Belichick, what it's going to look like for a guy that won 6 Super Bowls at 72 years old, getting into the college game for the first time. What you just heard there was his new general manager at North Carolina, Michael Lombardi. And what I know for sure, but in my mind, I don't know what the on-field product is going to look like, but I think Bill Belichick and Michael Lombardi are going to change the game of college football forever. That is my biggest takeaway, and you heard it there in that interview. And I wanted to lead with that is because these guys have seen it done at the highest level, and they're going to take that approach and they are going to bend the college game to their will in terms of the infrastructure and what it looks like. And there are a lot of probably people out there listening saying, well, aren't there the equivalent of pro departments and collegiate departments out there? Yes. What I mean by this is I think these two are going to take it further than it's ever been before. What does that look like? We talked about cap analysts in the past. We talked about potentially area scouts. I think these are going to be things where they're going to challenge the NCAA and the bandwidth, just how far they want to go with this. I am super, super fascinated to see what North Carolina is going to look like, really, from an infrastructure standpoint, because it would only take somebody like Bill Belichick or Michael Lombardi to come from the NFL and say, hey, listen, this is the way that it's been done at the highest level. Why wouldn't we do that here? And until a couple days ago, you have never had that. Sure, you've had coaches in the NFL, but the way that these two are intertwined. But my biggest takeaway is I think from a pure infrastructure standpoint to what we'll see in college football for years to come, yes, the game has gravitated naturally to general managers. The credibility, the equity that these two add to the operation, just from a collegiate standpoint, it's going to be fascinating to kind of see the ripple effect over the last couple of years as the rev share comes into place, and I think the college game and the Sunday game become more and more intertwined.
Coop, I agree with you on so much of what you just said. I do think that they are going to probably push the envelope farther than many others have. And I think the interesting thing here is that they're talking about it. You and I know there have been schools out there that have tried to kind of go this route, but they don't really want everybody else to copy what they're doing. So it hasn't been quite as loud publicly. Obviously, Lane Kiffin has tried to do a little bit more of this, but they'll certainly push the envelope farther. I think the question becomes, the NFL still from a player salary and structure standpoint is way more structured and defined. And we can say that currently, okay, now we have everybody's got kind of the same rev share from the house case, or at least we think. But ultimately, like, there will be teams this year that probably exceed house plus extraneous NIL spending, like exceed 30 million. And so college is closer to a salary game, closer to a solved game than it was before. But I still think it is a bit further off from the NFL, right? You don't have the multi-year contracts that are actually enforceable like you do in the NFL. You don't have the draft. Like, Carolina finished the season poorly. They don't get a higher draft pick. College football is make it, take it. So if you're good, you generally stay good. And if you're not, it is harder to climb up. But I'm fascinated to see, like, can they uncover some of these diamonds in the rough? And then will Carolina pay up for it? Because, again, it's not a true salary cap sport like the NFL where these guys are coming from.
I guess that's my biggest question, right? If it was as black and white as the NFL, just transactional, you would say, okay, this makes a lot of sense. The biggest element to the Bill Belichick hire that I don't really understand yet is how are they going to navigate the high school process? And the other part about this that I find fascinating, is Bill Belichick going to be involved in these visits? What does that look like, just in terms of, like, all right, how much bandwidth does he actually have, and how much interest does he actually have to be involved in these type of things? Or does Bill Belichick have enough cachet to say, ultimately, at the end of the day, listen, you have an opportunity to be developed by the greatest coach of all time? Who else can say that? That's the pitch. Here's the dollar amount, sign on the dotted line, and away we go. And is it going to be that simple? But the thing that has stood out to me over the last week or so, I was in Mobile for the Alabama-Mississippi All-Star game. I asked Tristan Norman, who has signed with Texas A&M as a receiver this year in the 2025 cycle. I said, hey, what are your thoughts on the Bill Belichick hire? He said, who? And you think of the last Super Bowl that Bill Belichick won, these kids were 12 years old, right? So this is not like a comparable to Deion Sanders or any type of way. I think there's a huge educational gap and component to this Bill Belichick hire that North Carolina has to be acutely aware of. Like the marketing machine in Chapel Hill has got to be going 24/7, 365. I think people understand who he is and what he brings to the table. But the element of recruiting these guys in the society that we have now created in college football, that's nonstop too, right? I mean, these guys, they demand a lot of attention. That's the part to me that is still kind of the hovering question that I don't know how to answer if you're a North Carolina fan wondering how Bill Belichick's going to do with that element of college football.
Totally agree. Coop, every year I shoot this little TikTok, and it's here's how old this kid was the last time like your favorite team had a Heisman winner or won the national title. Like here was good. Here's who was good when he was in fifth grade. Here's like when he was in eighth grade. Here's who was winning, and it makes me feel so old every year. Like I remember, from your neck of the woods, I was talking to Jamar Chase. He didn't know who Peter Warrick was. I was like, dang, like okay, like that was just kind of shocking, back when Jamar was in high school. I'm also interested strategy-wise. Like Carolina is not like fully a Goliath, but they're not really a David school either, right? Like, are they going to try to run like some system that you could run at like a Georgia or an Oregon where you really can get the best players out there? Or are you going to go something a little more college-y to maybe overcome some of the deficits in terms of just general talent that you can get? Obviously, Belichick's used to being in the NFL. They all run very similar things in the NFL because of the transient nature of the free agent market and like the short, nature of all these guys' careers, which is that part is very similar to what we have now because guys just bounce team to team every single year. But do we know what they're going to run yet? This is kind of curious.
No, I don't know. And that's kind of the interesting point. Scott Turner, according to Inside Carolina at 24/7 Sports, it seems like Scott Turner, who is the interim OC at Las Vegas Raiders, guy that I worked with during my time in Michigan, the son of North Turner, a guy that's been around. From what I've heard, that's the guy that they're targeting. Obviously, nothing official on that. So I'm curious about that as well. And acclimating to the calendar, we just talked to Eric Rivers, how important it is in his decision to know who the quarterback's going to be, right? So the rest of these components can't fall into place as well. But I'm interested, because I've been pretty convicted on this, and I kind of feel like I'm an island. I think North Carolina is a top 16, 17, 18 type of job in the country. I mean, you look at the ACC right now, Clemson, you and I think about a year ago, had a pretty in-depth talk about Clemson, which way that they were trending. And although they'll be in the playoffs, you could say, are they any closer to a national championship than they were a year ago, right? Look at the ACC, look at Florida State, major rebuild that they're going to have. What does Miami look like with Cam Ward? And then you have SMU coming from the group of five in their first year. That makes the ACC championship. It makes this conference so much more appealing. And then from a recruiting standpoint, you have the Carolinas, South Carolina doing a tremendous job there. But you can get into Georgia, Florida as well. You heard Michael Lombardi talking about he wants to make North Carolina a national brand. And if you look at it through the basketball lens and you look at it through the Jordan lens, it makes a lot of sense that they would do that. Now, that's the way college football is heading. I think this can be one of the better jobs in the country. The fit here in terms of a 72-year-old Bill Belichick getting the most out of it remains to be seen, but it's fascinating nonetheless.
Completely agree. I mean, like Coop, we had that graphic on the screen. They go 8-4, 6-7, 9-5, 8-5, 4 consecutive years up until this year with back-to-back first-round draft picks. Like that kind of says a lot to me. It's like, okay, there is still a lot of potential to be unlocked here, but also, we're making bowls somewhat comfortably with first-round quarterbacks, so that there's a lot to be done as well. And I wonder if Mac Brown had not had those first rounders, which look, he recruited them, he signed them, he gets the credit for doing so. Would they have made this change maybe a lot earlier? Because there were other elements about that team you'd watch, and it was kind of concerning and frustrating at times. Like some of the toughness, some of the mental errors that they would make, year after year. And that's college ball, they're college kids. But at a certain point, it's like, okay, this is a bit much here. I think Carolina, you said 16th. I don't know if I can get there, but I think they're solidly a top 25 job for sure. And I think if you told me top 20, I probably wouldn't push back on that, especially if they do have that NIL commitment to football that they make to basketball.
All right, let's take a look at their schedule in 2025 here. I mean, you talk about Mac Brown, 44 and 33 in 6 seasons with the Tar Heels. We talked about that 9-win season as well. I mean, but I just felt like there was a lot of food left on the table. And obviously, I don't know everything under the hood, but you think about North Carolina getting the most out of it. Obviously, Bill Belichick getting a $20, or excuse me, a lot more than $20, $20 million investment there from the financial fund in the NIL. You look at the schedule next year, but in your eyes, what's a successful season for North Carolina? And we can call it the free agency period or the transfer portal. A lot of work to be done, and a lot of answers a lot of questions remain, and answers that Bill Belichick still needs to come up with. But what does a successful season for 72-year-old Bill Belichick look like?
I would say probably in year one, depending on who they go get in the portal, obviously, which we're going to be following here on the 105 throughout the offseason. I would set it baseline like 8-4 regular season. I do like to get TCU early. TCU in back-to-back years has not come out of the gate ready. Like they almost lost to Stanford this year, which was kind of shameful with how bad Stanford was. And in the prior year, Colorado blitzed them pretty good there in Fort Worth. So that as an opener is actually probably kind of favorable if you look at how Sonny Dykes has had his teams prepared in that week 0 scenario. At UCF is certainly winnable. They're probably favored in 5 or 6 conference games here. Most likely an underdog to Clemson. At NC State's always kind of challenging. At Cal can be tricky, but Duke, Stanford, Virginia, Syracuse, Wake. There are a lot of names in the ACC that I would kind of not want to play compared to those guys. So this is a nice schedule to get off on the right foot.
Right. I'm thinking 7 wins. I think that's very obtainable for Bill Belichick in year one. I think that's kind of where you want. And if they surprise some people 8-9, look out, just in terms of what they would be able to really kind of turn that into from a roster management standpoint. But I'll give you a couple names, and then we'll go to break here. Luke Kromanoki's still out there. Mendoza from Cal. We talked about Malik Murphy, Bo Prabula, Justin Martin from UCLA, Matthew Sluka in Lonergan, Dylan Lonergan from Alabama. There's some names out there right now that I think could be good plug-and-play guys, give you a Band-Aid or a bridge for 1 to 2 years for Bill Belichick. So we'll see how it shakes out. They need a quarterback there in Chapel Hill. Guys, stick around. Speaking of the portal, as the portal king returned, Lane Kiffin. We'll talk about him next.